We often talk about these big moments, shifts that really reshape how society works. Like, think back to the move from farming to factories. That Lewis turning point, it just unleashed so much economic growth.
Right, a huge transformation.
But what happens when the big change isn't a new industry, but people,
hmm
specifically the aging of the population? That's kind of the story playing out in Japan right now. It feels like we're hitting another major turning point.
That's a great way to put it. It's driven by demographics, and it's having this profound impact on the labor market who's actually available to do the work.
Exactly. And this isn't just some slow, gradual thing, is it? The sources suggest it's more fundamental.
It really is. It's a structural shift. As Japan's elderly population grows and, well, birth rates stay low, you get these very real limits on labor supply. The RecruitWorks Institute actually calls it the Reiwa turning point in their big report, which is what we're diving into today.
Okay, the Reiwa turning point. So that's our focus. Our mission with you today is to really unpack that. What's driving it? What effects are we already seeing? And maybe most importantly, this growing shortage of workers in really essential jobs. The ones that keep daily life running.
hmm And that recruit report gives us a lot to work with. It's at labor market analysis, surveys from essential workers, public servants, people on the front lines.
And even case studies from places already dealing with significant depopulation, right?
Exactly. So it's quite comprehensive. It paints a detailed picture of this transformation.
All right, let's get into it then. Let's unpack this Reiwa turning point.
Okay. So at its heart, it's this structural change we mentioned. Labor market driven by the aging population leading to, well, fewer available workers, labor supply constraints.
And they're framing it as the second major shift since that Lewis turning point.
That's right. The first was agriculture to industry. Huge growth, eventually higher wages. This one, it's different, driven by demographics limiting the supply side.
What really jumped out at me first was just how widespread the impact is already. The report says labor shortages are hitting, well, pretty much everywhere.
Yeah, it's not just one or two sectors. Obviously, healthcare and elder care, we've known about pressures there for a while. But it's also logistics, construction, even tech fields are feeling it.
And public services too, right? Maintaining infrastructure, education, even things like auto mechanics, restaurants, hotels.
Absolutely. And the report gives this really stark example. The number of people applying to be police officers is dropping significantly.
Wow. That really says something.
It really does. It underlines this idea that Japan's basically in a zero-sum game for labor now. If one company or organization manages to hire someone,
Someone else is likely losing out.
precisely, there isn't this big pool of untapped workers waiting anymore.
Okay, now here's where it gets kind of counterintuitive, maybe. Usually you think good economy, companies want to hire, leads to labor shortage, bad economy, labor surplus. Simple enough.
That's the traditional link, yeah.
But the Bank of Japan's Tankan survey data apparently shows that relationships started to, well, break down around 2018. How the economy feels overall and how tight the labor market feels aren't really moving together like they used to.
That's a key finding. And it's not just about general economic sentiment. There used to be this other correlation, too, between feeling short on labor and feeling short on equipment or machinery.
Ah, right. If you need more people, you probably need more tools for them. Makes sense.
But that link has also gotten weaker, apparently since around 2014.
And the researchers have a theory about why, don't they? Something about service industries.
Exactly. They suggest it might be because in a lot of service jobs, which are a huge part of the economy, now you just can't easily swap people for machines.
Right, you can automate a factory line maybe, but automating empathy or complex caregiving, much, much harder.
Precisely. And you see the impact of this fundamental shift playing out in hiring and wages. RecruitWorks Institute's own data. It shows companies are finding it harder to actually fill their open positions for new graduates, especially looking ahead to 2025.
And it's tougher for smaller companies.
Significantly tougher for small and medium-sized businesses, yeah. Their hiring fulfillment rates are quite a bit lower.
At the same time, what about experienced workers, mid-career hires?
That's the other side of the coin. Big companies have massively increased their plans for hiring mid-career people, like more than tenfold in the last decade or so.
Tenfold. Wow. So intense competition for people who already know what they're doing?
Absolutely fierce competition for experienced talent. They're not just looking for fresh grads. They need skilled people now.
And all this competition, it must be starting to push wages up. Finally, Japan's wages have been pretty flat for a long time.
It seems to be. There was a survey in 2024 by Tokyo Shoko Research about the government's goal aiming for a minimum wage of 1,500 by 2029.
Right. How are companies feeling about that?
Well, it's split. A lot of smaller businesses say, no way, that's impossible. But overall, a majority of companies are either already paying that much or think they can get there. So it does suggest things are starting to move on the wage front.
Okay, so let's dig into the core mechanics here. Labor demand versus labor supply. On the demand side, it sounds like the aging population itself is a huge driver.
It really is. As people get older, they simply need more services,
Hmm.
particularly those related to, health and daily life.
And the report had some striking numbers on that, didn't it?
Yeah, really stark. People over 80 have something like 35 outpatient visits a year on average.
Yep.
Compare that to people in their 30s and 40s, it's about 9 days.
So nearly 4 times the demand just for doctor visits.
Exactly. 4 times the demand for medical professionals right there. And for long-term care services, the difference is apparently even bigger.
And it's not just healthcare and elder care, is it?
No, it ripples outwards. Think about logistics delivering goods, groceries, medications, and administrative services too, managing pensions, social benefits, all the paperwork increases.
Right. Okay, so demand is definitely up. What about the supply side? You mentioned constraints.
Yeah, the supply side is where the squeeze really happens. The report highlights that older individuals, even if they work, tend to work fewer hours. Plus, with pensions, many might not need or want full-time jobs.
So less total work getting done per person, even if more older people are technically employed?
That seems to be the case.
Yeah.
If you look at labor input, basically, the number of workers times the hours they work, it was kind of flat between 2013 and 2023 if you ignore the COVID dip.
Which is way different from the decade before that, right?
Totally different. Between 2000 and 2012, labor input actually fell by over 9%. So we stopped the bleeding, maybe, but didn't really increase the total work being done.
But wait, didn't you say the number of employed people actually went up recently?
It did, yes. Between 2013 and 2023, the number of people working increased, reversing the earlier trend. And a huge part of that increase was people aged 65 and over joining or staying in the workforce.
Okay, so more older workers,
Right.
but working less.
Exactly. That's the crucial point. While the number of employed people 65 plus went up significantly, their average working hours went down.
Why is that?
The report calls it the aging of the elderly. Basically, within the 65 plus group, there are fewer people in the younger end, say 65, 69, and way more people age 70 plus plus, especially 80 plus act. And naturally, as people get into their later 70s and 80s, they work fewer hours, if at all.
Okay. So the composition of the older workforce is changing.
Right. And this trend isn't stopping. The projections,
No.
well, they're pretty sobering. RecruitWorks Institute forecasts a labor shortage of 3.4 million workers by 2030.
3.4 million.
And it gets worse. By 2040, they project a shortage of 11 million workers.
11 million, that's huge. It's hard to even picture.
It is. And the report really hammers home that these shortages are most critical in those life-sustaining essential services. It's not just an economic number, it's about whether daily life can actually function smoothly.
Yeah, if you don't have people to maintain roads or drive trucks.
Exactly. Infrastructure maintenance suffers. Roads, bridges, tunnels don't get repaired. Maybe you have to close lanes or sections. That means traffic jams, longer commutes, lower productivity overall. Logistics get disrupted, delays in getting goods, affecting everyone. It just drags everything down.
It becomes this cycle, potentially. If basic services struggle, people spend more time just dealing with that. Maybe they can't focus as much on their own work.
It's a real risk, a potential negative feedback loop.
Okay, the report also connects these demographic shifts to how households spend money, right? More elderly people means more single-person households.
That's a direct correlation, they point out. The data is pretty clear. Average household size has shrunk quite a bit. It was 2.63 people back in 2002. Now it's down to 2.20 in 2023.
But the total number of households went up.
Yes, because you have more people, especially older individuals, living alone. So smaller households, but more of them.
And that affects overall spending patterns.
In an interesting way, because average household spending has actually decreased slightly. But since there are more households, total consumption across the economy has stayed relatively stable.
But what people are buying is changing.
Definitely. And it circles right back to those essential services. Households headed by someone 70 or older are spending more on healthcare, transportation, communication, utilities, even furniture and household goods.
So that increased spending by older, smaller households directly fuels the demand for workers in those specific areas.
Exactly. And there's this concept of economic density decreasing. Think about utilities. It might take more total labor to service, say, 3 separate single-person households compared to one 3-person household, even if the total number of people is the same. Or in-home care, the need just naturally rises as more people live alone.
That makes sense. It's less efficient in a way, requires more labor per person supported.
Kind of, yeah. The report also looked at specific survey data on family spending and time use.
Right. The National Survey of Family Income and Expenditure and the Time Use Survey, what did those show?
Well, reinforcing the point, households with older members, 65, 74, and 75 plus, just spend more on healthcare and long-term care, no matter the household size. The demand is clearly linked to age.
But there was a twist related to household size, wasn't there?
Yes. As the household gets bigger, going from one person to, say, 3 people, the relative spending on health and care for the older members compared to younger adults actually goes down,
Implying.
implying that in larger households, maybe more care is being provided informally within the family, less need to buy those services externally.
Okay. And what about how people spend their time? The shadow work idea.
Right. That refers to unpaid housework, childcare, elder care. The time use survey suggests that having other people living with you generally reduces the time you spend on that stuff.
Yeah.
And younger housemates seem to have a bigger impact on reducing housework time for people in middle age, like 35, 74.
So linking it all together, smaller households mean potentially more individual housework and potentially more need to buy services externally, like cleaning or care, which again increases demand in the labor market.
It all seems to interconnect and point towards greater pressure on service labor.
Okay, let's shift focus to the workplaces themselves, the essential workplaces. Recruit surveyed over 2,500 workers across key sectors. What did they find? Big pressures.
Huge pressures. Almost 40%, 38.3% to be exact, said their workload had increased in the last 2 years. And over a third, 36.5%, reported doing unpaid overtime.
That sounds pretty unsustainable. Are workplaces trying to adapt?
Some are, yes. About 37% said their workplace had made some kind of business improvements recently, mostly things like standardizing tasks, trying to cut down on unnecessary work, and bringing in some technology.
And what's pushing them to do that? Just the workload.
That's a big part of it, yeah. Increased workload for current staff and just this growing feeling that they can't easily hire more people, necessity driving innovation, basically.
But are these workplaces fully modernized? What's the reality on the ground?
Well, there's still a ways to go. The survey found nearly half still rely heavily on paper records, company smartphones or mobiles for work. Not that common. And lots of communication, even externally, still happens via phone and fax.
Fax. Wow. Okay, so definite room for improvement.
For sure. And based on their field research, the report lays out this kind of 3-step.
Examples.
Things like changing quality standards so kitchen staff don't need to come in ridiculously early, or standardizing check-in times for short stay care residents, or redesigning a warehouse layout to cut down on walking distance. And critically, they emphasize leadership needs to make tough calls about what not to do anymore.
Right. Deciding to stop doing something can be powerful. And the final step.
Step 3 involves 3 key actions. First is task shifting and task sharing.
Okay, what does that mean exactly?
It's about moving tasks around based on who can do them, not just who traditionally did them. So maybe shifting non-specialized work away from highly skilled mechanics so they can focus on complex repairs. Or having part-time nurses share certain tasks to cover shifts better. Or letting care assistants handle more of the indirect care tasks in a nursing home.
And that actually works, improves things.
The examples suggest it does, leading to better operating rates, less overtime. The second action is human resource development, basically investing in training and upskilling people.
Like specialized training for nurses or rotating younger staff.
Yep. Training nurse practitioners, rotating new nurses, regional programs to train care assistants, even getting high school students involved in care work early on.
Building capacity. And the third action.
That's technology adoption. But, and this is key, it needs to be strategic. Everyone needs to understand why the tech is being brought in and what the goal is.
So not just tech for tech's sake.
Exactly. Examples include things like camera and microphone systems in nursing homes, feeding alerts to staff smartphones, sleep monitoring sensors to cut down on unnecessary night rounds, or using AI to optimize shift scheduling. But success really depends on the organizational culture and support from the top.
It sounds like these workplaces are really trying to figure out how to do more, or at least the same, with potentially fewer people. Now, what about public services? The report seemed quite concerned about local government.
Very concerned. Municipalities, local governments are the bedrock for so many essential public services. Welfare, roads, sanitation, you name it. And the survey showed employees there, especially in smaller towns and in sectors like welfare and civil engineering, are really feeling the workload increase.
And their jobs aren't simple routine tasks either, right?
No, not at all. Most of what they do involves judgment, adapting to situations. It's complex work. And the workload is increasing across different types of tasks. Two, more routine cognitive stuff in tax and welfare, more non-routine manual work in welfare and sanitation, more analytical and interactive work in civil engineering.
But staffing levels aren't keeping up.
Generally not. In some areas, like civil engineering in smaller places, staff numbers have actually decreased. So more work, fewer people. It's a tough equation.
Did the employees have ideas on how to ease the burden?
They did, but the concerning finding was that the measures they thought would help most related to personnel, more staff, better training, bringing in outside expertise, were the ones being utilized the least.
Especially in those high-pressure areas like tax and welfare.
Exactly. Now, there are some efficiency efforts, like using special vehicles for road checks in Saitama. And outsourcing is already pretty common in areas like fire services and civil engineering, so there might not be much more room to gain there.
So the overall outlook isn't great.
The employees themselves are quite pessimistic.
Mhm.
A significant number don't think current public service levels are sustainable through 2030. They suggest cutting unnecessary tasks, maybe rethinking service levels, talking more with residents. But the report concludes that public bodies can't fix this alone. It needs a broader community effort.
Which brings us to those local initiatives in depopulating areas. The report looked at places where the aging population is already really high, right? Like Kawakami Village, Saki Village.
Yes, places that are kind of living the future already in a demographic sense, and they face this big economic challenge, losing the economy of agglomeration.
Can you explain that term again briefly? The benefits of concentration.
Sure. It's just the idea that when you have lots of people and businesses clustered together, it's more efficient. You have a bigger labor pool, shared infrastructure, easier access to suppliers and customers. When the population thins out, you lose those advantages. Retail struggles, logistics get more expensive, delivering healthcare becomes harder.
Makes sense. So daily life just gets less convenient, fewer buses, maybe the local shop closes, harder to get to a doctor.
Exactly. The strain on essential services becomes really apparent.
But these communities aren't just giving up, are they? The report highlighted some really creative solutions.
Absolutely. They're harnessing community power. In Saki Village, you have the Getabaki Helper Program, local seniors providing paid care to other seniors, helping fill the gaps.
That's clever. Using the available resources differently. What else?
Kawakami Village started a mobile supermarket, Kawakami Life, to bring groceries to people in areas without stores. Sake Village also has community teams, like snow damage rescuers and road clearing supporters, to deal with their heavy snowfall things the local government might struggle to handle alone. They even have joint projects between the community and the government.
And it's not just about services, but also civic engagement.
Right. Tajimi City has a citizen council, where residents actually get together, discuss city problems, and propose solutions. It builds that sense of shared responsibility.
These sound like really important lessons. As more places face population decline, just relying on the old ways, on purely private services, might not work anymore.
That's the core message. We need to learn from these pioneering regions, build new systems that leverage community strengths, because the reality is changing.
Okay, so wrapping up this deep dive, it's clear Japan's at this really critical moment, this Reiwa turning point.
Hmm.
The demographics are reshaping everything, creating these serious labor shortages, especially in essential services.
And it's not just an abstract economic problem. It's hitting everyday life, questioning the sustainability of how communities function.
This feels like a truly fundamental shift, needing completely new approaches from individuals, businesses, technology, government, communities, everyone.
It really does. Which leads us to that final thought for you, the listener, to chew on. How do societies, maybe your own society eventually, adapt? How do we ensure essential needs get met when the demographic ground is shifting beneath our feet and labor is scarce?
Yeah, what's the role of technology? What about community support like those examples? How do our ideas about work itself need to change? It's a huge question, not just for Japan, but potentially for many aging societies around the world, something to definitely keep thinking about.